Hmm. When I saw Madam Cash drag the crying boy into the dark street, I knew I had to tell someone. They called her Madam Cash because she was the richest woman in our town. She lived in a huge mansion on the hill, far away from the rest of us. Her cars were the finest and her clothes always sparkled. Everyone knew her, but no one really knew her. I was just a regular kid living with my parents and going to school. We lived in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other and kids played outside until the street lights came on. It was a safe place, or so we thought. One evening, while playing soccer with my friends, I saw a black van driving slowly through our streets. It was odd because we didn't get many strangers around here. The van stopped and two men got out. They didn't look like they belonged. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but ignored it and continued playing. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. A little girl named Amara was missing. She has been playing outside her house when she disappeared. Her parents were frantic, searching everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. The whole neighborhood came together to look for her, but it was like she had disappeared into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and more children went missing. It was always the same pattern. The black van would show up, and then a child would disappear. Parents became more protective, keeping their kids indoors, but it didn't stop the abduction. The fear in the neighborhood was palpable. One night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tamara and the other missing kids. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I passed by Madam Cash's mansion, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The black van was parked outside our gate, and the same two men were unloading something. I hid behind a tree and watched. The men carried what looked like a large sack into the house. My heart pounded in my chest. What were they doing? I wanted to run away, but something kept me rooted to the spot. After a while, the men got back into the van and drove away. I waited a few minutes before creeping closer to the mansion. The gate was slightly ajar, so I slipped inside. The mansion was dark, but I could see lights coming from a basement window. I inched closer and peered inside. What I saw made me gasp. The basement was filled with cages, and inside them were children. They looked scared and hungry. And there in the middle of the room was Madam Cash. She was counting money, piles and piles of it. The sack the men had brought in were filled with more cash. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Madam Cash, the woman everyone admired, was behind the abductions. She was selling children to make money. I felt sick to my stomach. I had to do something, but I was just a kid. What could I do? I ran home fast as I could and told my parents everything. They listened but were skeptical. I was known for my wild imagination. They thought this was just another one of my stories. Frustrated, I decided to investigate further on my own. The next few days, I watched Madam Cash's mansion closely. The black van came and went, always at the odd hours. The two men were regular visitors, always bringing in more sacks. I couldn't see inside, but I knew what was in those sacks. Money from selling innocent children. One evening, as I hid in the bushes near her gate, I heard voices. Madam Cash was talking to the two men. "We need more kids," she said. "The demand is high and we are running low." The men nodded and left in the van. My heart sank. More children were going to be taken. I followed the van that night. It drove to the poorer part of the town, where kids often play unsupervised. The men packed and watched, waiting for the right moment. My heart pounded as I watched from a distance. Then they saw their target, a little boy about 5 years old, playing with sticks. The men got out of the van and approached the boy. One of them grabbed him while the other covered his mouth to stop him from screaming. I wanted to run and help, but fear paralyzed me. They threw the boy into the van and drove off. I had to do something. I ran to the nearest house and banged on the door. An old woman answered and I blurted out what I had seen. She looked at me with wide eyes and called the police. But by the time they arrived, the van was long gone. The next day, the news of the missing boy spread through the town. His parents were devastated and the fear in the neighborhood grew. Parents kept their children inside, but it didn't stop the abductions. Madam Cash's operation continued, and more children disappeared. I felt helpless. No one believed me about Madam Cash. They couldn't imagine someone so wealthy and respected could be behind such evil. I needed proof, something that would expose her once and for all. One night, I decided to sneak into her mansion. It was risky, but I had to try. I waited until the black van left, then slipped through the gate and crept to the basement window. The lights were on, and I could hear voices. I took a deep breath and carefully opened the window. Inside, I saw the cages again, filled with children. They looked weak and frightened. Madam Cash was there talking to the men. "This batch needs to go tonight," she said. "We have buyers waiting." My heart pounded. I had to get evidence. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I zoomed in on Madam Cash, her face cold and unfeeling, as she discussed selling the children. It was undeniable proof. I needed to get this to the police. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a noise behind me. I turned and saw one of the men standing there, his eyes wide with surprise. "Hey!" he shouted. "What are you doing?" I panicked and ran, but he grabbed me. I struggled, but he was too strong. He dragged me inside and threw me to the ground. Madam Cash looked at me with a mixture of surprise and anger. "Who are you?" she demanded. I didn't answer. I was too scared. She looked at my phone and realized what I had done. "You think you can expose me?" she sneered. "No one will believe you." She ordered the men to lock me up with the other children. The basement was cold and damp. The other kids looked at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I tried to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. I had to find a way out and get the recording to the police. As I sat there, plotting my escape, I heard a familiar voice. It was Madam Cash's sister, Ngozi. She had come to visit, bringing her young son, Chidi. I remembered hearing about Chidi. He was Madam Cash's nephew, her sister's only son, who she had waited years to have. I watched as Chidi wandered into the basement. He saw the cages and the children inside. His eyes widened in shock. "Auntie, what is this?" he asked, turning to Madam Cash. Madam Cash froze. She hadn't expected her nephew to see this. She tried to play it off. "Chidi, go upstairs. This is not for you." But Chidi didn't move. He looked around, then back at his aunt. "Why are there kids in the cages? Why are they crying?" Madam Cash's face twisted in anger. She grabbed Chidi's arm and yanked him upstairs. I could hear their voices as they argued, but I couldn't make out the words. All I knew was that Chidi was in danger. Hours passed, and the night grew darker. The men were preparing to move the children, and I knew I had to act fast. As they opened the cages, I saw my chance. I waited until one of the men turned his back, then ran for the door. I managed to slip out and sprinted towards the gate. Just as I reached the gate, I heard a voice behind me. "Stop!" It was one of the men chasing after me. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get away, had to get to the police. I didn't stop until I reached the police station. Breathless and shaking, I burst inside and told them everything. At first, they were skeptical, but I showed them the recording on my phone. Their expression changed from doubt to shock. They immediately dispatched officers to Madam Kash's mansion. I went with them, leading the way. When we arrived, the men were loading the children into the black van. The police moved in quickly, arresting the men and freeing the children. Madam Cash tried to flee, but she was caught, her face twisted in rage, as they led her away in handcuffs. The police searched the mansion and found more evidence of her crimes. The children were taken to safety, and the neighborhood finally breathed a sigh of relief. But Madam Kash's story didn't end there. In the days that followed, more details of her operation came to light. She had been selling children to wealthy buyers, making millions in the process. The black van had been used to transport the children to different locations, where they were sold to the highest bidder. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories.